This is Michael Clara coming to you from Salt Lake City, Utah. Today is October 1st, 2024, and this is update number 4 to the Spencer Cox signature list cover-up. What I want to unpack in this update, and then it's my understanding that this particular resolution did pass at the Central Committee meeting, and it says the Utah County Republican Central Committee kindly and politely requests that as a matter of moral principle, personal integrity, and good sportsmanship, Spencer Cox and all candidates who did not win 60% of the delegate vote at the state convention publish to the citizens the names of all signatories received by required date to be on the primary ballot, to be verified by citizens and state convention winners immediately, and give access to view the signatures to the candidates immediately. So my understanding is that that passed, and it's interesting that Utah County is doing this because they actually had the majority of signatures that came out of their county that ended up on the Cox, on Governor Cox's list. And I believe they had like 42%. I'm sorry, the numbers aren't showing up on here, but they had 42% of the signatures on Spencer Cox's list came out of Utah County. One of the twists to this resolution is an email that just went out, and it probably went out through some other social media platforms this past Saturday, from the secretary of the Utah County Republican Party. And what he says is, after that resolution that I just read was passed, he sends out this communication to the Central Committee. And he says that after the calls for disclosure of signature and signatories and observing a great deal of concern about the signature process in our Central Committee meeting, I did some research by directly making phone calls, reviewing documents, reading statutes, and asking questions. I personally spoke with several staff members in the state elections department, the Davis County clerk, the state grandma ombudsman, the state auditor, and Utah County election office, and others. Some things I learned really surprised me. Here's what I have gathered so far in doing some research on this issue. So what I want to do is kind of unpack what some of his conclusions were in this document that he sent out to everybody. And first of all, my concern would be right off the bat is the people that he's talking to. I have this hierarchy of information sources that I kind of always make in my own mind. Here's an example. Here in Salt Lake City, where I live, I have the highest level of trust for certain officials, whether they're elected or appointed. And in my case, because of my experiences and that I've had interactions with people here in Salt Lake, I trust Chief Mike Brown the most. And then over here is Cindy Gus Jensen. She's the chief of staff for the Salt Lake City Council. And then there's some other people here that I've interacted with. And then on the lowest level of trust would be Mayor Mendenhall, would be Rasmussen over at the State Board of Education, Nate Salazar, who is the school board president. Those are the people that I would trust the least. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the number of the people on this list that he names, like people at the state elections department, that's the lieutenant governor's office. I wouldn't trust anything that they say. Davis County clerk, Brian McKenzie, I'll tell you right now, I don't know him. I've never met him, but the truth is not his friend. The state grandma ombudsman, no. So these are people that unfortunately, he's going to go. When I'm saying that to say I've never met Kirby Glad, so I'm not saying that he's being deceitful here. I'm saying that his sources of information are the deceivers. So that, we already know, as we start this process of unpacking his conclusions, he's going to be way off track because of his sources of information. So he says in this communication to the committee members, all signature packets for federal, state, and multi-county races, including the race for governor, are turned into and verified by the Davis County Clerk by contract with the Lieutenant Governor's office since 2016. So let me point out that in a previous video, you can look it up. It's update number 3. You can look at the details where for the Spencer Cox signature list cover up, and it says here I posted it 6 days ago. You can go back and read the details to it. What I learned was that on March 15th is when the according to the state auditor is when the 28,000 signatures that Cox people turned in on February 20th. By March 15th, according to the state auditor, they were all verified by the clerk in Davis County and his people. The clerk actually says that his verification process with his office actually happened on March 18th, which is fine. It's a 2 or 3 day discrepancy. And the problem is, though, that I point out in that update is that it was on March 19th, and you see it right here, is when the contract with the governor's office, lieutenant governor's office in Davis County was actually signed. And basically here are the duties and responsibilities that McKenzie, who is the Davis County clerk, had to perform. So when he says, Kirby says here, all signature packets for federal, state, and he says that this was by contract, that's not accurate. And he probably got this information from the clerk in Davis County, McKenzie, who clearly lied to him. And by the way, this paperwork that I'm showing you, I'll make sure that that I'm referring to, I'll make sure that I'll send it to Natalie Clausen. And so if you want to see any of this paperwork, if you know how to get in touch with me, then do so. If not, get a hold of Natalie Clausen, and I'll make sure that, I think she pretty much has most of this, but if there's something that she does, and I'll make sure that she does. So let's utilize her if you want a verification on anything that I'm saying. So moving on, he says that the verification is a manual process where an employee, usually a temporary or seasonal, with brief training, manually looks at each name and compares the petition signature against a database of signatures collected by the state, such as from the voter registration form, driver's license, and other sources. The problem that I have with his statement here is that that's not accurate. Out of the 36 employees, whether they were full-time or temporary, in the Davis County Clerk's office, only one, and this is the one right here, received the signature verification training, received the certification on it. And the others either did half of it or didn't do it at all. Even McKenzie, who is the clerk, if he participated in any of the signature verification for the Cox signature list, that's concerning because he only does half the training, and at that only does it on March 20th. A day or two after Cox's signatures were actually all verified by his office. The last part here that Kirby tells us that the process costs around $10,000 for 28,000 signatures. And I think that might be right. I would put it that that's a little low because we do have the invoice that on May 21st, the Davis County, so understand that they don't sign the contract until, mid-March after they did the verification for the Cox signatures. And then who knows how much verification they had already done once they signed the contract. But at any rate, he bills the lieutenant governor's office for this amount. Let's move on to number 2 of Kirby's communication. He says the proper number of verified signatures for Spencer Cox is 28,006, were verified several weeks before the deadline. The Davis County clerk oversaw the verification. I spoke to him directly, and he provided this report to the lieutenant governor's office, who then certified the Spencer Cox as a primary candidate. By the way, 32,883 signatures for Cox were examined, and 4,877 signatures were rejected. There were additional, we'll get to that, but let's move on here. That you can go back to update number 2 that I created on YouTube. It says here I created it 12 days ago, and you can review that. Those numbers that the clerk gave are at least those numbers, are accurate in terms of what he gave to the lieutenant governor once he got his numbers right. But we know if you go back and look at update number 2, Cox fell way short of the required threshold that he needed to meet. And you can go back and watch update number 2 to see how that happened. He goes on here and he says the part I want to focus on now is he says there were additional hundreds of signatures that were not verified because they stopped the process as soon as enough signatures are verified. Now, this is progress, because remember, in some of these updates, I would point out that it was thousands of extra signatures that Cox had. And on that, I think it was like June 21st article where Lethem, who owns the Gathering Ink Company, he says thousands of signatures additional. And then when they asked the Davis County clerk to confirm that number, he says, I don't remember how many extra he had. Well, now we're okay with telling the truth. There were additional hundreds. And as you know, if you've watched the update, he actually had 592. But now we're okay with being truth tellers, and Kirby was given some accurate information. But again, there's this narrative that the signatures were submitted early enough that the campaign had plenty of time to gather more signatures if needed before the deadline. And remember, I point out in a previous update, this is the same language that we get from the director of elections from Cali. He tells us this in mid-June that, he had more signatures been needed. The campaign had an extra month. Same thing in September. John Dougal repeats the same narrative. What this reminds me of is back in the day when I was on the school board. This is Superintendent McKell Withers, who was a superintendent when I was elected to the school board. And I went there and I quickly learned that between me and the superintendent and the other board members, we got some problems here because we're talking about two different forms of democracy. When I showed up on the board, it was my understanding that I was there to represent the interests of my community to the board and the superintendent. And the superintendent instructed me, this is like I get elected in November, and this is a meeting we're having in December, I think. And he's telling me, no. The form of democracy that we're going to practice now is that the institutions that sprang out of this democracy, those become important. And their processes is more important than what the interest is of the people. And that my job is to follow instructions and orders from him, even though he's my employee technically. But now, and the other board members, by the way, were indoctrinated in this. So the institution is more important than the people, and that's the philosophy and the the culture in the school districts. The problem is I see that here. That's what we're seeing here, that the process and the institution of an election process is more important than the people. And that's why you have this narrative that's commonplace, that had he had more time, he could have got more signatures. And the reason, let me just back up here and say, the reason that they have to say this, that that had he had more time, because it's part of rigging the system. They know back in June, back in June they knew that he didn't have the signatures. So this is why Callie starts the narrative. This is why in September you have John Dougal say it, and then now we are in September, the end of September, you have Kirby repeating it because that's what they've instructed him to do, and he dutifully does it because this thing is rigged. They know that Cox didn't have the signatures, so this is why they got to say that. Another interesting point that Glad points out, when fraud is evident, such as full page of rejected signatures, which might indicate that a teenage signature collector who is paid by the number of signatures maybe took a shortcut by signing the entire page. Now, number one, they're all adults that did it, so I don't know what he means by that. He says these cases are referred to the Attorney General for investigation and possible prosecution. The Lieutenant Governor's office will not have any records about this investigation. Well, number one, I don't know if that's true that the Lieutenant Governor won't have any records, but that's not the point. The interesting point is this is that what he just said is the whole reason why I started this series of videos. And if you go back and watch the original one, Spencer Cox signature list cover-up, you'll recall that the cover-up was about the fact that the Attorney General's office had actually initiated an investigation into fraudulent signatures or forged signatures, even gave a case number in this business card to the victims in Utah County in Vineyard, and then turned around and denied that it happened. But look at this. We're making progress. Somebody told Kirby that there really is an investigation going on, and he's now telling all the people in Utah County who's reading his communication on the Central Committee, there is an investigation, and it's now okay to talk about it. So again, we're making some progress here that now they're admitting to it. Number 4, the legislature has determined in statute what information can and cannot be released in GRAMA. And he goes on and he says, he goes through the appeals process, the chief administrative officer. I learned this by talking to the state GRAMA ombudsman. So appeals or demands to the governor to release names will not make any difference, as the governor has no authority in release of the records. That's not true. The problem is that I don't think the ombudsman told him about how the Attorney General's office has, and the State Records Committee is complicit in denying us the ability to even make appeals on these issues. So, and you can go back and look at update number 1, where we talk about how we end up in court with a couple of these issues. Number 5, any candidate or voter can already obtain a list of everyone who signed a candidate petition, minus the ones redacted for privacy, by filing a GRAMA request and paying. And again, this is another thing that we're going to assume he's been misinformed on, because you can actually see everything. You recall that in a couple of the updates, I bring up the letter that the clerk in Washington County provided me on May 17th and said, it's been determined that you will be provided with an opportunity to view the requested records, all of them, even the private ones. And again, we know the rest is history on how that went down. Number 6, he says any candidate or voter can already view the actual signatures, not take pictures or get a copy again for privacy reasons, but a government employee has to go through the physical sheets of paper, identify one by one which voters have marked their records as withheld, and then such names and signatures have to be covered. And by the way, that's not true. There was an incident back, I believe it was in June, where there was a couple people able to, like one of the people came from Washington County, one of the delegates, the one that I was helping from the beginning that got me involved in this, and was able to review signatures of state school board member Norton, in the Davis County Clerk's office. We are able to see this. The law does allow for it. Again, I just showed you the letter, from the Washington County Clerk, and then Davis County Clerk actually allowed some people to view all the records, even the private ones, and even compare the signatures. So he was misinformed again on how this happens. And then as you know, we're in a process right now where we ended up all the way up at the State Records Committee on this issue, and to fight for the right, to just have the law be followed in terms, because it does allow for us to view it. It's just the Lieutenant Governor's office, in concert with, in this case, Washington County, is preventing that from happening. There is a legal avenue, he says, to challenge the signatures of any candidate. A declaration of candidacy filed under this section is valid unless a written objection is filed with the clerk or the lieutenant governor before 5 p.m. on the last business day, that is at least 10 days before, and he goes, and fourth Saturday in April. And I think that puts it around the 15th of April or something like that for this year. And he says, no objections were timely filed, and therefore the candidacy of Cox is legally valid. Yeah, therefore. Okay, so what he was not informed on is that, at least the records that I have, well, let me tell you this. April 12th is the deadline to challenge signatures, although April 15th is the deadline to submit signatures. Then, in practice, I know, and there might be other records out there that give a date sooner. I just know that as of April 16th, the Lieutenant Governor's office was not releasing any records. And here's an example of that, and this is to one of the delegates down in Washington County that was trying to view the Norton list for the Utah State Board of Education candidate, and he says right here, you're not gonna see them. That it's denied. So my point is that when he repeats this narrative, well, the Lyman people didn't file any kind of objection, so Cox is legally valid. Well, come on. There was nothing to file an objection to, because at the time nobody could see the list. And keep in mind, read this, pause this and read it, and then go back and read what Kirby is telling us, that anybody can see them. Anybody, right. But no, they can't, according to the Lieutenant Governor's office. And so again, when you start lining this up, you start seeing the cover-up and the deceitfulness and the quote-unquote conspiracy that was laid out, and then they think that people are just dumb, and that today they're going to say, oh, well, just anybody can see it. Well, we're not dumb. That's not the case. That might be what the law says, but that certainly isn't what the practice is. He says that the candidates for general election must be certified by the county clerks by August 31st. This is to allow for printing of the ballots. And then he goes on, and basically what he's saying is, look, this is the way it is, and there's nothing we can do about it. So this reminds me of back in the day when I was a police officer in Texas. I was at this, I was like in my late 20s, and this, a buddy of mine who was a cop had an overtime job where he would work at the wrestling, at the major wrestling event that was going on at the time, and he couldn't make it one night and asked me if I could fill in. I think his wife was was having a baby that night, or went into labor. So I went, and I'd never been to one of these events before. And at one point, these guys start fighting in the ring, and they fall out of the ring. And one of them picks up a chair and starts hitting the other one. And so I take off running, because this is an aggravated assault, and I'm running. There's another cop that's running behind me. And when people see me running, and I'm in uniform, and I jump over this railing, and I'm going to get, they're just like screaming and all excited. I mean, they are just, it was kind of exciting for me that, oh, they're going to see me make an arrest on this guy. And the cop behind me that's running, I thought he was running with me. He's actually running, calling my name, and I can't hear him, trying to stop me. And he does stop me. Fortunately, I recognize he's calling my name, and he's telling me to stop. So I stop, and then he gets to me and he says, no, it's theater. They're really not hitting each other. He said, don't go over there. And I remember him hugging me, because he was horrified that if I got there, there was really going to be a fight, because those guys would have thought that I was just part of the act, and I would have taken everything seriously, because I had no idea. The reason I'm bringing that up here is because I never went back and did that. Even if somebody asked me to go, I was just perplexed at the time that these people have allowed themselves to be seduced. I'm talking about the people that actually go to wrestling. It's not real. I didn't know that. But when you look at people, and even to this day, they're excited, they like it. And so I realized, that these people are complicit in their own deception. And they're okay with it. They're not actually being, what I'm saying is, and maybe there's some fun to that, maybe seduction, it's not always bad. And so we've all been, victims of it, and sometimes it's okay. In this case, this is one of those times where there may not be no romance attached to it, but these people, again, I use the term, they are complicit in their own deception. And it's managed reality. And the reason I bring that up, because I feel that's what's going on today with this whole issue with the Cox signature list. And when you look at some of the updates that I provided, I explain how I got involved in this. I'm kind of a victim of circumstances here, and an outsider that's been drawn into this. And I'm committed to it, to continue to uncover it, but I wasn't in the beginning. And one of the things I've had to reconcile in my own mind, that I'm sharing this with anybody watching this video, because I think you need to look at this framework that I've had to come to terms with, and recognize that we don't want to do this. You don't want to be complicit in our own deception. This is real life stuff. It's not theater. It's not entertainment. And you don't want to be seduced. And this is why we're going to be, I think a number of people have been, this is why you keep getting the same narrative. Oh, well, if he had time, he would have gotten the signatures. And you only say that because you know that he doesn't have the signatures. That's the only reason you say that. But you got to keep track of what's going on with the managed reality that they're giving us right now. Kirby says, it is apparent to me that we are way past the deadline for challenging the signatures. Even if there is a way to change the candidate, it's too late to make changes on the ballot. See, and again, this is you're getting lulled into this, and you're going to be part of this deception. So what I've realized is recently that what they're trying to do, Kirby is part of this, whether he's doing it intentionally or he's been deceived himself, I don't know. It doesn't matter. But what's happening today, they're not even trying to fool you as much as they're trying to instruct you. They're trying to get everybody on the same page, and like a magnet. And to me, that's what we call propaganda. and we are the victims of that. We're going along with it. If we don't like the laws, we can advocate and change them. But the situation is that the situation as it stands now. I think what he meant to say is that the situation is that this is what it is today, and you better accept it. Here's the situation that, and we could probably find an earlier date, but I'm using this one on June 21st. Is when here's a public statement by Phil Lyman. He's calling for an audit for the signatures, and he's saying that he doesn't believe that Cox has the signatures needed, that he met the threshold, the legal threshold, to even be on the ballot. And everybody talked about during this time in June and July how crazy Lyman is, and I think the Tribune, Brian, the reporter, even called them his fans instead of supporters or citizens. They were fans of Lyman for buying into this conspiracy theory that Cox doesn't have enough signatures. Well, in September 3rd, the auditor tells us that he didn't have, he doesn't have, he didn't meet the threshold, the legal threshold. So we get confirmation that what the quote unquote conspiracy theorist was saying is true. And what I'm saying is when Kirby says as it stands, yeah, this is as it stands. This is where we're at. Last part of Kirby's communication, it is also apparent that the law should be changed so that the public has the same access to records of signers of candidate petitions. He goes on. And he's right, the law should be changed. Here's another quick example. Back in the day when I was on the school board, and they would try to tell me, this is the law. You can't go out and do things. You can't represent anything. You only have authority when you're here with the board. And when I went to the legislature, there was a task force at the time. I went and spoke to them. These idiots, the board president, which, by the way, this is Christy Sweat. She is today still on the board of education in Salt Lake. And this is an editorial note I'm making, is that she is the president of the National School Board Association. She was the architect of this whole FBI thing and stuff that happened during COVID, where parents were labeled as terrorists, and they got the Justice Department momentarily to buy into that. She's the one that did that. And she's here in Utah, having all kinds of influence through the School Board Association. And this whole FBI thing, she did a version of that on me when I was at the board and had the police guard me at a board meeting. She criminalized my dissent. But the reason I'm bringing this up here is because at the late Becky Lockhart, Speaker of the House, came to my rescue and had this put into the law, into state law. Number 5, notwithstanding a local school board's status as a body corporate, as an elected member of a local school board serves and represents the residents of the local school board member's district. And that service and representation may not be restricted or impaired by the local school board member's membership on or obligation to the local school board. So the reason I'm bringing that up here, because this is what motivates me to be involved in this cover-up today, because I still got some trauma about what I went through a decade ago on the school board and all the scars I had to get and the wounds I had to receive in order to change that process and to communicate to everybody and to make it clear that democracy is about the people, not about the institutions. And you see how Becky Lockhart agreed with that and used her power and authority to put that in the law, that the power of the people is more important than the institution. The problem is that today we got this same thing happening now, that we're at the point on this election issue where we're allowed to see the truth. They can no longer conceal it. And so now they're admitting, yeah, there is an investigation by the Attorney General's office. That, yeah, we tried to hide that, but yeah, it's okay to tell you now. Well, they're not okay to tell us. We uncovered it. So they have to admit to it now. Then, they have to say, okay, go along with what Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen were saying, and after gaslighting them doesn't work, yeah, Spencer Cox doesn't have the signatures. It's, we're going to tell you that. But you know what? There's no remedy, because the institution of the election process is more important than the people. So there's nothing for you that you can do. To me, that's a form of censorship that they're constantly trying to beat us down with, and through have the state records committee shut us down, have the courts shut us down. Then those are acts of censorship. Having the secretary, whether he was unwittingly seduced or he's a purposeful accomplice in this, I don't know. It doesn't matter. But we're going to see more of this. We see it now, and these are acts of censorship. And what I'm saying is, don't fall for it. And he's saying there's nothing you can do. Excuse me, but bullshit. We can vote. So we have a solution, and I'm grateful to Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen for hanging in there, because back when the primary was done, I was ready to move on, because this is normal for me as a former member of the school board. I saw a lot of corruption, and if there wasn't a way to address it, I mean, if the district attorney or the attorney general didn't want to address it, I wasn't going to beat myself up about it. I just put my, said, okay, that's fine. Sure, I'm going to move on, because if the powers that be aren't going to address the corruption in the school district, there's nothing I can do about it. Same thing here. But we have, this thing is where we continue to address the corruption and uncover it because of the tenacity of Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen, and of the people that support them. I've met a number of those people, and I'm one of you now. I've been recruited. I wasn't recruited. I was converted. Nobody tried to convert. This has happened on my own. But my point is, this is the change that we need to do, is to write in Phil Lyman and Natalie Clausen. That's the solution.